Awesome. Alrighty, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar that's all centered around change management. I am so excited to be joined today by Theresa Griffith, VP of Organization Development and Change Management over at Ensono. I'm going to pass it over to her to introduce herself shortly, but for those of you that haven't listened into one of our Spekit sauces, I'm Melanie Fellay, co-founder and CEO here at Spekit. Spekit is a just-in-time learning solution designed to put your training, your documentation, your knowledge exactly when and where your employees need it to help with things like change management and adoption of your tools. So super excited for today's topic. And before we go any further, Theresa, passing it on to you, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got this career in change management.
Oh, that's an interesting story. But I mean, mainly for the past 20 years or so, I've been in a role, consulting role where I've did business transformation for big companies, mid-sized companies, major culture change, those types of things. And so I ended up at Ensono because it was actually a client I worked with, but it was the first time I became an employee for a couple of years, but they're a really exciting company. They're growing very quickly. They provide multiple IT services, consulting, managed services, you name it, they do it. So it's a very unique business model they have. They're growing fast, and that's always a good recipe for they're going to need a lot of help with change. They're in a transformation mode, and they're going to lean heavily or get a ton of value out of having a strong OCM team and an OCM methodology. So that I usually am drawn to companies that are in flux and that are kind of going crazy and need help. So
love it. That's amazing. And how did you get into change management to begin with?
Well, I started out as a training in the training area. And when I was teaching courses or having to design training courses, especially around process, I kept saying, well, is that really the process that you want us to teach? Because I think there's a better way to do it than that. And so I started getting my hands into process, and they're like, and changing and modifying and helping design processes. And then once the processes would be okay, then it was like, oh, really? That's the system you want us to use? Really? And so before I knew it, I ended up kind of working in different areas I was talking about these 4 tires of the car: people, process, technology, and information. I don't see it as 3. People merge tech and info together, but they're very discretely different things. So I kept kind of getting into all of these lanes, and which was good because it lends itself to when you're doing change management or organization change management, you're an advocate for the people. And so the leads that we have, the OCM leads, when a project calls on us to say, hey, we're going to be launching a new system, or we're doing massive mods to a process, we get invited very early as a rule at our company because we're advocates. And if they're designing screens, or they're designing or configuring things in a screen that are that's not going to be good for humans, OCM leads are advocates for the people. So you need to speak up early in that cycle to say, here's what I think would be better for people. We'll get better process compliance if you do it this way. And where's your trigger that tells me when to start my job? You don't have a trigger in there. So we provide input like all the way through the project. And it sounds like, oh, we don't have time for that. We can't go to that many meetings, but really we record all of our meetings at Ensono for multiple reasons. We have this WIM program, Work in Motion, and we have this big library of, best practices library. So you can kind of go in and watch business cases being built. You can go watch somebody building a container in AWS and find whatever you want. So basically we try to get involved early and then get engaged in those projects so we can kind of see what are they building and is that consumable by the humans, because there's nothing worse than them, coming in with something bad and telling you, okay, get people to adopt this. So that really works well at Ensono.
That's amazing to hear. And I can definitely relate to people building things that end users don't want to use. That's how I got my career started here. Now, before we move on, so you talked about OCM, organizational change management. It's somewhat of a new function for a lot of companies. Some people that might be listening might not have someone that's dedicated to change management. We actually hosted an event here at our office earlier this week where we had a lot of enablement professionals, training professionals, and the topic of change management came up. And most of them said that they don't have anyone in their organization that's really responsible for change management. So it becomes a shared responsibility and a fraction of someone's job. So can you speak a little bit more to kind of how Ensono looks at change management versus training? How do you work with training teams? And just speak a little bit about that structure.
All right. Well, for one thing, if you don't have change management, you're wasting a lot of money
Yeah.
because every company that I've gone to and helped, I mean, many times the ROI is in the millions. Companies can always name, here's a system, we paid all this money for it, we had a project team, they configured it, we designed processes around it, and no one uses it. It was just a big throwaway, or they have poor adoption, or they have people who are half-hearted users and putting junk in there.
On that note, my favorite stat to quote is, according to Salesforce and their IDC report of the Salesforce basically economy, for every dollar that's spent on a Salesforce license, $5.6, and that number keeps growing, is spent on ancillary services, right? Professional services, apps. And so if you're spending $1 million in Salesforce licenses, now you're spending that in the ecosystem plus your in-house teams. And so to your point, like that ROI or that lack of ROI is insane. And most companies don't even know where to start measuring that. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I agree.
No, that's fine. No, I mean, it's in the millions. Even for a mid-sized company, you're blowing a lot of money if you don't have OCM. Even if you're not buying a new system or installing some big system, and you feel like you have adoption, you know, unless you're, I don't know any company that never changes things. They'll go for years. They don't change fields. They don't change reports. They don't change anything. So every time you're changing things, human beings, sometimes if it's even little changes, human beings go through a cycle of emotions. And so they dig in their heels. They don't feel confident. They start guessing and saying, well, I know this email came out saying there's this new field and service path or whatever, or Salesforce or whatever. I don't have time to dig through emails and go look at what that was. So I'm just going to wing it and throw something in there. Now you got bad data flowing all the way downstream to build teams or order fulfillment teams to billing teams and everything. And now dozens of people have just wasted. I'm a Six Sigma person, so I'm always looking at waste and ROI and things like that. And that was one of the big reasons we leaned heavily into Spekit, was because there's the 5-second rule. If most people, if they cannot find the answer they need while they're filling in data, setting up an opportunity in Salesforce, I've got to go put the product codes in there and the SKUs, and hopefully they aren't gibberish that technical people described or whatever. But if I don't have that handy in 5 seconds, I can't go drill down into those menus and load those products in. I'm going to guess, and now you get the wrong product, and the wrong teams are fulfilling it wrong, and it's extremely expensive. Your revenue reports are off, everything. So, you know, Spekit, we use Spekit on Salesforce. We use it on ServiceNow. We lay Salesforce all over, Spekit all over the place on everything.
Which I love.
I was talking to somebody from SAP yesterday, and we were buying a modeling tool, process modeling tool. And I said, oh, well, we'll do our modeling here, but our user interface is through Spekit. And he goes, what's Spekit? And when I described it, he's like, what, how do you spell that? He goes, this is incredible. I'm like, I know, because buying a modeling tool, it's a modeling tool. No one's going to go into that and reference. You need it for auditors. You need it to be the Bible of the processes, but it's not accessible typically. I no matter how pretty it is. We did SharePoint for a while, saying, okay, all the process and all the artifacts and cheat sheets are in SharePoint, but still I'm in Salesforce. Now I've got to go into SharePoint. I've got to go look up the cheat sheets for product. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to throw it in there. I'm going to guess and route the ticket to the wrong person or whatever, so Spekit has really improved that a lot for us, because if it's handy, it's improved the quality of data. Data entry, and then that drives reporting and everything. So that 5-second rule is a big deal. So I can't access something in 5 seconds to do my job, I'm probably not going to do it. 80% of the people say, I'm just going to put garbage in the system, or I do stop. Now the clock's ticking, and I used to clock how many people paused in their jobs to go look something up in a knowledge base or something. And I added up those times. I mean, really, and within a few hours, you can save a ton of ROI just observing people working.
Now, that would be an interesting exercise to do. So we've done quite a bit of research on it, and there's really interesting studies out there, right? Everyone from like McKinsey in terms of time waste, and waste is also something I spend a lot of time thinking about. And then a study came out recently that on average, employees switch up to 1,100 times per day between tabs and workflows as they're going through things. I don't know if you saw that, but it's hard to quantify. What we all know is that it happens a lot, especially as SaaS proliferates. And so very much passionate about that instantaneous piece. And I study a lot the science of habit formation, not just in how do humans develop better habits, but also like, how do you develop the right habits in your employees, right? Because at the end of the day, change is a habit, right? If you're trying to drive change, you're trying to change behaviors. And so understanding, and the 5-second piece is important there in terms of thinking about like, if you study the best example I love to reference when it comes to habit formation is the whole going to the gym, right? And in order for a habit to develop in Atomic Habits, there's a ton of books on it. It's like, you need the trigger, right? So for the gym, it might be your alarm going off in the morning, right? Or it's like waking up, or maybe for you, it's at the end of your day, but there's the trigger that kind of like kicks off the habit. Then you've got the reward at the end, which is like, okay, I feel great about myself, or like I had a good sweat. That's the reward. But it's your ability to respond to that trigger that's the most important piece. And that's why they say like, building a habit is so important, or the response time is so important. And that's kind of what you're referencing. Like the response time of getting help is so important, because they did studies that if the gym is more than something like 20 minutes out of the way, you're just not going to be able to develop that habit. And that's why like making sure that your gym, you got that trigger, if it's on your way to work, or if it's easy, you're much more likely to develop that habit. So anyway, I think it's really important to understand the psychology of people and how people work, how people think, and how people change behaviors when you're trying to roll out change and drive change management, because ultimately, to your point, you're dealing with people. And so on that note, we've talked a little bit in the past about the 3 components and your methodology over at Ensono when it comes to change management. And just so people understand, like, how many employees do you have, and how widespread is this 3 C's across your organization?
Well, we're a global company, so we're in India, Germany, Poland, Europe, US, obviously. And the 3 C's are just fundamental, obviously, to any company, because the first C is people have to be committed. So you always have to start with their heart, because the number one reason, and I don't care how much you root cause it, I don't care what company it is, there are a lot of, I guess, factors where people will like, well, this group's resisting because they don't have buy-in, because it's changing their role or whatever. It always comes down to fear. That's why people don't want to change. And so you need to, if you just have a training department and that's all, and you go roll out a new system or you process changes, and the trainer comes in and they go train, and they might have some why slides of why are we using the system or what have you. That's too late. Our runway for addressing why and getting people pumped up and getting them committed is a minimum of 30 days out before they're even going to walk into a training program or anything like that. We usually start about 90 days out, and we have this cycle of guess what's coming, and then this whole cycle of different kinds of communication and messaging that we go through. But if they aren't committed by the time they walk into training, you don't have them. They're not going to pay attention, and you can't fix that in the first 5 minutes of training. You can't. So that's why that's a big difference between training and OCM. OCM is communication or messaging. It's that psychology, and it's getting that first C, getting them committed so they're excited and looking forward to going to the training. You might go, oh, when would that ever happen? I see it happen. I mean, we're doing that right now. We have a bolt-on system onto Salesforce that a bunch of sellers are going to go through, the population of sellers at our company. And we've been communicating with them for the last 2 months, and they're at the point where like, when are we getting this? When are we getting this? And they started out going, why do we need to do this? We already have enough work, blah, blah, blah. We're barely able to hit all the demand we have with, end of quarter now. And now their training's next week, and people are trying to get in the training. We're like, wait, you're not even going to be a user. Why do you want to go to the training? but they're real excited about it. And so you want them to walk into the training excited. So it's a big, huge, huge component. It's not communication. People think it's just making announcements and sharing a timeline. That's project management communication. Training communication is, here's when the sessions are. This is psychology. This is psychological messaging. We get champions to start talking about things. We get the senior VP to do we had just sent our Rally the Troops email out 3 weeks ago. And they come out and tell you how cool this is going to be and how great it's going to be and so forth. So that's a big deal. If you get their hearts, now you got their minds. So now the second C is competency. So make me want to do this and see the value. That's the first C. Now you got me, I'm in the seat, teach me, make me competent at doing this, because otherwise then I peace out. Then I resist if I don't have that second C and I don't know how to use the system. I don't like feeling stupid. I want to know how to use it. The third C is, what is the third C?
Confident.
Confidence, my gosh.
Committed, competent, confident. It's become my mantra every time I think about change management. So I can help you out.
I've had 12 meetings a day for the last week. So.
I can relate.
Yeah, so it's confidence. So I've gone through training and I've learned how to fill the fields in, how to follow the process. And now once I leave, the other reason people will resist is I don't like feeling stupid. I don't like forgetting things, and people want to add value. They have good hearts. They really do. And they want to get in and just rock it. And they want to go in and do their job at that same pace, at that same rhythm.
Done.
Yeah. So they leave training. They're not going to retain all that. I don't care how fantastic a trainer you are, how many trips, you're just not going to be able to teach all the end-to-end things. You're going to teach a happy path, but that's about it. They're not going to retain everything. And every day they're not using the system, they're losing, what is it, still 20, 30% a day or something? It's a lot.
The learning curve. Yeah.
So, and they ask, the system we're launching, one of their first questions was, are we getting Spekit on that? And we were like, should we tell them?
That means you've done a really good job of driving adoption. That's amazing.
Yeah, they're like, we better have Spekit. So now they're just like, wait, you just got it on Salesforce and now you want it on these other systems. But no, and so yeah, because that's their safety net. And so they feel like, I want to be excited about this. Tell me how to do it. So I feel, I'm competent in doing it. And now make sure I have a safety net. If I forget something, no big deal. Boom. I just go click on the little Spekit icon. There it is. So even if I didn't pay attention, or even if I forgot something, that's the confidence cylinder right there. If they're not feeling confident, if they're feeling scared, their productivity usually goes flat lines. They pause, they hesitate, or they just don't engage. They won't log on. And that's usually, all three of those ingredients are necessary. Training is not enough. It's just not. I would say just doing training is like running on a third tank of gas and expecting to complete the whole journey. You're just not going to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point of like, when that individual goes to do that thing, like that's when I really talk about like just in time. It's about how can you personalize the support or the training to when that individual needs it, because that's when the fear kicks in. It's like, okay, I went to that training. Maybe I'm going to do that quote tomorrow, which is fine because I might still remember it, but my colleague isn't doing another enterprise deal for 2 months. So by the time they go do it, they've forgotten it. They can't remember. And so much of that, like psychology of change, psychology that, really ultimately impacts your employee experience, right?
Yes.
Especially now that people are remote, some people are back in the office, that like there's different challenges. When everyone was remote, that was like, how do you make people self-sufficient? How do you make sure that they can just get through, to your point, the things they need to get done so that they can focus on selling, so they can focus on pipeline and the things that they need to do without getting stuck because they're finally trying to like go create that quote. And, things are hard right now and you're not creating deals every day, and you go do it and then you get stuck and you get frustrated. And all of a sudden, like those little moments of joy that you get in your day-to-day get taken away just because you feel stuck. And all of a sudden, then that's when you start building resentment and resistance against change, when the reality is a lot of these systems really, when utilized correctly, are meant to help them accomplish those goals. But that safety net, to your point, that fear, that negative experience they have can really impact their desire to be open to things in the future too. So
you named something, and you talked about something too that's very critical, that you can't teach everything. There'll be all these exception processes and this or that or what if, and all. You can't teach all that, or you shouldn't. That's just messing with people's minds. Teach them the Pareto. 70% of the time, these are the tickets you're going to fill out in Service Path, or this is how you're going to load an opportunity in Salesforce. And that the nice thing about Spekit is it's like, don't sweat all that other stuff. We only do decommission tickets once every 6 months. Don't worry about it. It's in Spekit. Whenever that pops up, boom, go there. There you go. There's your recipe. Follow it. I don't have to teach it to you. It's there. And actually, we have like 1,800 people who use Service Path, and we just went to a completely different platform. It's a completely retooled, major transformation, major overhaul of the whole system. And that's one of the reasons we bought Spekit. But we didn't have to do training on it. We did overview training. We did the first C, stuff around that. Like, look, isn't this cool? It does this, it does that. It has a CMDB and blah, blah, blah. And it connects all these dots. And they did that part of it. And then they said, hey, we have this thing called Spekit. So everything you do, if you don't know how to do it, you click on that and it'll tell you how to do it. And and it also reduced one of our business case when we were doing the business case on Spekit. The ROI was like pretty much easy because they were routing tickets to like wrong teams that had to kick back and bounce it back, doing reverse, pulls in the process and things like that. And just that sort of thing alone, just reducing the number of noise out there away from our level 3 engineers, so that, okay, the tickets I'm getting now, they're clean, they're good, they're supposed to be to a level 3. And they're not having to deal with all of this noise. It really cleaned up, just order fulfillment and tickets, servicing tickets and everything just became a lot cleaner and more streamlined, because now they've got that in 5 seconds. That anything they need, they have the instructions right there. They don't have to remember it. They don't have to look for an email somewhere. They don't have to go to SharePoint and dig around. It's right there. And so they're able to handle more tickets with higher quality because of that. So just that alone paid for Spekit.
Love it.
So
well, you guys have been an absolute wonderful partner, especially thanks to you and Neil and others who have done a great job of really implementing the tool, because Spekit has its own change management. I mean, any new initiative that you roll out has its own change management. And when we were talking last time about the 3 C's, the one that I introduced, I was like, I've got a 4th one, and it was consistency, right? Because going back to change management, I think that one of the things that companies, like what you mentioned earlier about like your reps asking like, are you going to roll it out with Spekit? Because now they have this expectation, right? They're like, I'm going to have that safety net. I'm going to have that support when I need it. Consistency is so important when it comes to change. And when I talk to customers, like when I ask them like, hey, do you have a process, a repeatable process by which you kind of grade what kinds of changes you're rolling out, and what is the process that you have for each one? Because where I think a lot of companies struggle when it comes to change, and where they're not seeing the adoption that they want with or without a tool, take Spekit out of the equation, it's because one week they're rolling out a certain change one way, the next week they're rolling it out a different way. They're doing it end of quarter when your rep, they're not thinking about timing. They're doing it end of quarter when your reps don't have time. They're sending the email Monday morning when people getting in their seats. They still got Sunday scaries. They're just trying to get through their day. They're not ready for that change. And many teams haven't really developed a repeatable process that's consistent, because so much of the psychology of change, that fear, is, to your point, the element of surprise. Right. Mm-hmm. If you can really develop that repeatability of like, hey, whenever there's a change, we're going to communicate in advance. You mentioned something about like rallying the troops. Like, we're going to have champions that are going to help encourage you. You're going to have a training sessions. You're going to have office hours. You're going to have, whatever it is. If you can develop a little bit of consistency with how you roll out changes, like that alone is going to help reduce that element of fear and that element of just surprise when it comes to change.
Yeah, definitely. It makes a huge difference. It really does. So,
love it.
Anyway.
Well, we've talked about a lot of different things here when it comes to change management, I guess, and we always try to keep these Spekit Sauces episodes under 30 minutes. So we got 5 minutes to go. I guess when it comes to your career in change management, what are some of the most tactical pieces of advice that you have for someone that's listening, that's either new to change management or that's responsible for building out a change management process in their org, like where would you tell them to start? What are some simple things you've learned that either help you get potentially buy-in internally, or any ideas that come to mind?
One of our career paths, so I'm in charge of, I have a training team, I have an OCM team, I have an OD team that does competency modeling and all that. But what so you start out in training and then you promote up into OCM. So that's a promotion, it's a higher level, and it's got a tier of 3 more levels within that, because once you have training, you have one of the C's, but then you have to develop the competencies around their org psychology and so forth. And we have a methodology that we designed at Ensono, and we start out with an assessment to see how much of a disruption in people's lives is this new change going to be. And so we measure by high, medium, and low. We also have this, what we call our air traffic control screen, that all of the big changes that affect populations of more than 100 are all on there, and people can go out and see it. So they can see, oh, in July, this new change on how we do quoting on this new tool, they're going to have advanced pricing in it, or this or that. And that's another way. So we don't just do push communication, we do pull, and every strategic initiative or big project has a SharePoint site, so people can start seeing things there and getting that runway going there. But the competencies that our team is required to have is project management. They don't have to be PMI, but they have to know how to run a project, because sometimes you're always working with project teams, and sometimes you get green PMs, or they don't think of doing UAT, or they don't include champions in UAT. So it's kind of nice to at least have an awareness of how you manage a project. It's obviously training. A lot of them already have that. And then kind of communication, psychology, messaging, sort of almost marketing. How do you affect people's hearts? We have this big security culture campaign where we're boosting that up, and it's all fear and fun. Like, here are the things, how bad it could be if it goes wrong. And here are fun games you can play that you get rewards if you catch things and stuff like that. But
do you have any book recommendations on that psychology piece, or any sort of research that comes to mind? Like I mentioned the habit formation, like that's an interesting one, is and understand cognitive learning, but like, are there any books or anything that come to mind around that psychology piece that you think would be worthwhile for someone to listen to?
No books come to mind per se. There's a lot of stuff out there. It's like those type of books, anything that's about human psychology and anything about forming habits and things like that. Andrew Huberman Labs, he's got a free blog. He's phenomenal about humans and the brain and all of that. And it's all free.
I listened to his podcast about alcohol, the one about not drinking alcohol.
And he has a lot on attention. How do you get people to clear all the clutter out and focus and a lot of stuff like that? So I listen to like mostly podcasts, people like that are like into brain scientists, behavioralists, and things like that.
You know Jim Quick?
Yeah. I don't know him, but I mean, yeah, I know.
Well, yeah, I mean, as someone who wrote a book, he has a really good one that's all about the mind and like how to get people to focus in and stuff. Sorry, didn't mean to distract us. So getting back, so that's part of like how they get into a career in change management at Ensono, is like also this third kind of portion of psychology.
So it's training, it's project management and business process design, or process, some aspects of process. So you can tell if a process is bad, and so because remember, you are an advocate of people, so you need to be able to go in and look at a process and say things like, okay, where's the trigger that tells me I'm supposed to start this activity? And they'll go, I don't know, we can email the people. I'm like, why am I going to pay attention to an email? Like, let's fix that.
100%. And that's what we tell people when they're designing Spekit. Like, we have that third dimension of like, where are they when they start the process? Because that's where they need the visual indicator that there's support available to them. Like, how do you kind of like incorporate that into both the UI of the product and then the UI of the training that you do?
Another thing that we do to raise confidence, we don't have a big OCM team. We just have a lot of people who have OCM competencies in our company now, because like I said, we do this thing called WIM, work in motion. So I have 3 WIMers on just one of my projects, and they're invited. They work in all different parts of the company, but we're working on this new OCM gig. There's the one that we're doing for sales, and they follow that journey. And even if they can't make every meeting, which we don't expect them to, we record all of our meetings they go to this library so they can jump in and they can go see, oh, look, they're doing an OCM assessment. They're doing a change assessment. We're talking out loud and saying, well, what about this? And asking and doing the interview with the sponsors and all of that, trying to find out. And so they kind of hear that the thought process behind it. They watch us building OCM plans. They see how we're thinking through things. It's not training. We're actually doing our job anyway. So we're like, well, let's hit a record button and people can learn from it. So we do that a lot at Ensono. So that's where a lot of people learn. Most of your learning or training or whatever, your development of competencies isn't in the classroom. And I'm a big advocate of training. I run the training team, but most of where it really sinks in and becomes a skill is when you're watching somebody do it. It's like YouTube. That's why it's popular. You're watching people do it. And so that's what we do. A lot of this WIM stuff. We just hit record buttons on our Microsoft team meetings. And I'm doing a budget. I'm walking through going, all right, these are the line items. I have my budget. This is why I'm redlining. This is my thought process, and just park it out there. And then some people reached out. I did the Spekit business case is a popular one. A lot of people ask for that.
Really?
Yeah. Because they're like, man, that was a slam dunk.
How'd you get that? That's amazing.
Waste $4 million, or we could spend this. And, it was kind of like, oh, you'd be idiots. So yeah, that's one I get asked for a lot. So that's parked out there. So we do a lot of sharing, and that's where I think a lot of people learn OCM in our company is through the WIM experience as well. And we have a documented methodology that we kind of created. But there's ADCAR out there, there's Prosky. To me, those are very generic frameworks. And the 3 C's is where we really start with everybody. Get their brains wrapped around those 3 C's and say, how are you getting to my heart? How do I care? Well, we're rolling this out on this date and it's got these features. There's a really good video that we start with that it's the first time they were talking about the Apple phone. And somebody's, going, oh, and it has this and it does this much gigabytes of storage and it's all this technical stuff. Yeah. And then it flips to Steve Jobs going, look what I have in my pocket. I have the internet in my pocket. I have my phone. I have 5,000 songs in my pocket. That's what the Apple is. And I'm like, that affects the heart. This is just geeking out. You know what I mean? Yeah. We teach that. We say, that's the difference. It's make me care. Why do I care? How are you going to make my life better? Let's start there. And so then when they think of those 3 C's, it's like people just naturally start addressing them and saying, oh, we need to start communicating early. That's right. And don't start communicating factoids and features of your system.
What's in it
for that doesn't affect my heart. It's heart, mind, training, and ego is the comfort, the confidence piece. And if you get all parts of me all in, you've got all of that, then I'm engaged. I'm going to embrace this and love it. So,
and it's so interesting hearing you talk because you're really making, change. I truly fundamentally believe, and that's why I love change management and I love helping organizations solve it, is that organizations that figure out how to drive change faster, it's ultimately your speed of execution. It's how fast you're able to move as an organization and move as a culture forward. And I think that cultures and organizations that really embrace change and make it a habit. And it seems like your team and, thanks to your work and thanks to Neil and others, the work that you all are doing are making change really a habit in your organization. It really becomes such a differentiator for companies. And so as you think about the ROI, yes, it's the ROI of, the waste in technology and all those things. But I think what's probably hardest to quantify is how is the speed of which you all are able to innovate as an organization and innovate on your internal operations, innovate on your go-to-market, innovate on, because every company right now, especially adjusting to this economic environment, is double clicking on, to your point, do they have the right data? Are they understanding what's working, what's not? Oh, this isn't working. What do we need to do? How do we move faster? And if you can make change something that people just roll through and it's okay, change isn't something I fear. It's something that I lean into because it's going to move.
It's exciting.
Build that. Yeah. And you're able to build that muscle. Heck, you're able to move so much faster because so much of time that gets sunk in organizations is having to convince people why change is needed and then get over resistance and the psychology of people, the amount of waste that happens just trying to convince people of change. Don't make that investment to make change part of your culture is is fascinating. So
Yeah, yeah. I think cultures that change a lot, you learn more. And so we have a lot of promotions that we're promoting people heavily all the time. What's nice too is in this labor market right now, you don't get to hire all these geniuses coming in the door that already know how to do things. The market's pretty tapped out low. And so that's another reason why it's nice to have things that people can lean, other ways that they can develop skills, whether it's through, they can jump into the driver's seat without knowing a whole lot per se. And then Spekit is the coach. It's one of the coaches. It's like, hey, I've never done a sales pitch on this particular product. We have a lot of different products. And it's like, but I can go open it up and not only see some talking points and go to battle cards or whatever, but I can actually click on a video and watch one of the best people at the company talking about it. And now I can go make my call, or I can go, go to my meeting.
Those are some of my favorite use cases that we're helping more customers kind of like adopt and learn too. And yeah, I think we talked in the past about like how the shift between people and technology, and thinking about like, how can you think about like building your team and building your resources, while also how can a technology like Spekit or others kind of like help complement your team, and ultimately as the leader of the team, potentially help you save some headcount, because you're replacing some of the work that is done by just brute having to answer a lot of questions and having to create that with technology.
It's like a consistent coach. So they go to Bob, go to Mary. Well, they told me 3 different ways to do it, but it's like, now you've got a coach. That's another thing, is people say we're too busy. We can't be coaching people all the time. We have to be out working. So it's like Spekit becomes their coach, but it's a consistent coach because they're always getting the same coaching instructions, so that's another nice aspect of it too. So that people don't have to lean so heavily on the human coaches as much when they have that. So
love it. Well, yeah. Theresa, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Hopefully everyone that listened got some really great tactical steps they can take away around how they can, really embrace change management as a culture. I think that, what I loved about our conversation is we talked a lot about the psychology of change. And I think that people, teams, companies spend so much time planning the change, scoping the change, building out the change, the system, and just not enough on the people side, not enough on the psychology side. And so hopefully that's really the biggest takeaway that people took away, is like, how can you really bring that into your organization and steal some of Theresa's C's. So competency, commitment, competency, and confidence. And then if you want to bring in consistency, that's my 4th.
That's another plus. That's a good one to have a 4th C.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Theresa. Have a wonderful day. And thank you all for listening. We have another webinar coming up on change management, I believe April 25th. So take a look then. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.